Welcome to my channel. And today I want to share a story that proves hard work, perseverance, and integrity always triumph over mockery, arrogance, and empty titles. This story is about a young man from a small village who was ridiculed by his classmates for chasing humble dreams, only to rise years later to a position of incredible influence and respect, showing that true success is earned, not given, and that those who dare to belittle others often find themselves humbled by fate. It was a glaring Saturday afternoon in the bustling town of Mockery, the sun cutting sharp lines across the uneven dirt streets and scattering heat over the makeshift tents of the weekend market. Smoke curled from the barbecue pits where skewers of goat meat and chicken sizzled, mingling with the acrid scent of cheap beer sold in crumpled plastic bottles, and laughter that carried the casual cruelty of old classmates reuniting. At the center of the lively chaos stood Kofi Abiola, 27, whose worn-out shirt clung uncomfortably to him after a morning of deliveries, sleeves speckled with stains from the last batch of water filter demonstrations he had conducted door-to-door across Mockery's neighborhoods. Kofi had never gone beyond high school, but he had learned the world's subtle lesson early. Survival demanded ingenuity, grit, and resilience. Yet none of that seemed to matter to those around him at this moment. Leading the chorus of Mockery was Omari, 28. Once the pride of their high school, now vice director at Omari Financial Holdings, a man whose every smirk carried the weight of assumed superiority. Tay raised his bottle of beer as if holding a microphone over an audience primed for ridicule. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, loud enough for everyone to hear over the crackling grills and chatter. "Our class's most inspirational figure has arrived. Still knocking on doors, still selling nonsense. Kofi, do you want me to buy you a plate? You look like you can't even afford the barbecue." His words hung in the air, rolling like waves of amusement over the group, while Kofi stood there, calm and unshaken, scanning faces that had once shared playground secrets, but now seemed intent on measuring their worth against his perceived failure. "I'm just here to see old classmates," Kofi replied simply, the plainness of his tone causing the laughter to spike even higher, the kind of laughter that bites as much as it entertains. Tay's hand shot forward, slapping Kofi's shoulder with a theatrical heaviness. "Buddy," he said with a patronizing grin, "this circle is way above your level." Yet, as the laughter peaked, a soft vibration from Kofi's pocket drew a fleeting pause. His phone rang, and he lifted it, glancing at the screen with a calm that belied the storm of ridicule around him. "Excuse me," he said evenly. "I need to take a work call." The group snorted in disbelief, Tay leading with a sharp laugh. "Another customer telling you to get lost?" he jeered. But the moment Kofi switched to speakerphone, a silence spread, thin at first and then thick, pressing against the laughter that had once roared so proudly. A composed, respectful voice came through. "Mr. Abiola, the acquisition is complete. As of today, Omari Financial Holdings is officially owned by your parent company. Please attend next week's board meeting as our new chairman." The effect was instantaneous. Conversations died mid-breath, beers froze halfway to mouths, and the sun's heat seemed to fade under the weight of stunned realization. Tay's bottle slipped from his hand, smashing against the dirt with a metallic crack that echoed like an alarm. What? What do you mean?" Tay stammered, his smugness drained to disbelief. Kofi met his eyes, calm and unyielding, a quiet storm that left no room for argument. "It means that, next week, you will be calling me boss," he said simply. Silence deepened as his words sank, rippling outward through the crowd like an unstoppable tide. "I sell water filters," Kofi continued, his voice steady, "because that is my company. In 6 years, we have grown to be the top 3 in the state. And the corporation that acquired your firm, Tay, I founded it." Tay's face paled, a mix of shock, humiliation, and the dawning understanding of misjudged character and misplaced pride. Kofi turned, brushing past whispers and incredulous stares, his figure framed by the blazing sunset, walking as if he belonged to a world far above petty mockery. A world that respects resilience and vision over the shallow arrogance of inherited titles. "Don't worry," he added over his shoulder, a final cutting grace. "When layoffs begin, you'll be the first person I think of." And with that, he he disappeared down the lane of flickering lanterns and the lingering smoke of the barbecue, leaving a lesson suspended in the golden air. Fate does not mock the hard-working, it merely humbles those who look down on others. The market continued around them, oblivious, yet everyone who had known him once felt the weight of what they had missed. The profound truth that respect is earned by character, not by the transient shine of status, and Kofi Abiola, once the underdog, now carried the quiet power of destiny, fulfilled. Kofi Abiola's journey had never been a straight path. Born in the small village of Nkalagu, he grew up under the constant hum of bustling streets, vendors calling their wares, children running barefoot over dusty paths, and neighbors exchanging gossip over worn verandas. His father, a carpenter named Oba Abiola, had taught him early that hands that work honestly never go empty, while his mother, Imale, kept the household together with an iron patience and soft-spoken wisdom that shaped Kofi more than any classroom could. School had been a challenge, not because of a lack of intelligence. Kofi's mind was sharp, calculating, and endlessly curious, but because resources were scarce and opportunity scarcer. He watched classmates leave for cities with dreams of college degrees and white-collar lives, and though he envied them, he also saw the cracks in their carefully built facades. Entitlement, overconfidence, and a sense of invulnerability that would one day collide with reality. After high school, when most of his friends pursued further education, Kofi had taken a small job delivering household goods, his only capital a worn bicycle and a relentless work ethic. He discovered, almost by accident, the potential in water filtration systems. Families in Nkalagu, and soon in surrounding towns, were desperate for clean water, but solutions were scarce and expensive. Kofi saw a gap, a chance to improve lives and build a future. He borrowed, begged, and saved, buying a small inventory and cycling from door to door, demonstrating how a simple filter could transform murky water into something safe and life-giving. Slowly, word spread. People trusted him, not because he was flashy or formally educated, but because he was reliable, honest, and earnest in a way that commanded loyalty. Over 6 years, his efforts compounded. The small inventory grew into warehouses, the local reputation spread into regional recognition, and a corporation interested in social impact and innovation approached him with a partnership. This partnership turned into acquisition. And Kofi, always grounded in the values instilled by his parents, maintained his focus on providing value, on uplifting communities, and on rewarding the loyalty of his employees. Meanwhile, the classmates who had mocked him now lived in a different reality. Taye Omari, with all his titles and corporate polish, had built his empire on systems inherited from family connections, on the illusion of control, and on the fragile ego that equated success with the visible symbols of wealth. He had never faced the street-level grind, the nights spent cycling through storms to deliver a single sale, or the courage it took to start a business with nothing but determination. The barbecue incident crystallized everything that Kofi had internalized. That pride in others' misfortune is ephemeral, that ridicule does not define potential, and that the quiet diligence of character will always outlast the shallow applause of peers. As Kofi walked away from the stunned crowd, his mind drifted briefly to the future. Board meetings, expansion plans, strategies for national growth. All would require intelligence, foresight, and leadership, none of which could be learned in classrooms alone. He imagined standing at the helm, steering a company that had once been an idea on a kitchen table, now a force capable of reshaping industries, providing livelihoods, and supporting entire communities. He thought of the employees who had stayed loyal, who had believed when others doubted, and he made a silent promise to lead with integrity, humility, and vision. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Kofi felt a quiet triumph, not in humiliation dealt to his former classmates, but in the undeniable truth that perseverance, skill, and honest labor could redefine a life. Taye Omari and his circle would remember this day, but not as a spectacle. They would remember it as a lesson in respect, humility, and the unpredictable justice of fate, a justice that rewards effort, innovation, and character, rather than superficial measures of success. In the weeks that followed, Kofi's presence in boardrooms would become a quiet storm, each decision reinforcing the foundation he had built. Each interaction, a reflection of the values he had carried from Nkalagu, and the ripple effect of his journey would reach further than anyone at that barbecue could have imagined, including those who once laughed at his ambition. Because while the laughter fades, the impact of dedication and vision echoes for generations. And through it all, Kofi Abiola, the boy who once pedaled through dusty streets with a single vision, now moved through spaces of influence with the same calm resilience, proof that respect is never given lightly, but always earned through action, honesty, and the courage to believe in oneself against all odds. As the weeks turned into months after the barbecue incident, Kofi Abiola settled into his new role with a quiet authority that unsettled some and inspired others. The boardroom of Omari Financial Holdings, once a place where Taya Omari strutted with self-assured arrogance, now hummed with the energy of someone who had built an empire from nothing, who understood both the weight of responsibility and the potential of opportunity. Kofi walked in each day with the same unassuming demeanor that had once made him a target for ridicule. Yet his presence carried the invisible gravity of earned respect. Meetings began differently now. Whereas Tay had relied on inherited prestige and a polished tongue to sway opinions, Kofi relied on preparation, insight, and the experience of practical problem-solving. He questioned assumptions, challenged complacency, and insisted on data-backed strategies that not only preserved wealth but created new avenues for growth. Employees who had once been skeptical of his abilities began to see the depth of his understanding, the patience behind his leadership, and the unwavering ethical compass guiding each decision. Meanwhile, Tay Omari struggled to reconcile his previous superiority with his new reality. He had once mocked Kofi openly, ridiculing the very idea of someone selling filters as a path to influence, and now he found himself taking direction from the man he had scorned. Each board decision that Kofi made, each expansion plan, each strategic acquisition of regional firms, reminded Tay that prestige without substance was fragile, and that Mockery offered no shield against real achievement. The employees who had remained loyal to Kofi during his early struggles found their faith vindicated. Promotions came not to those with the loudest voices or the fanciest degrees, but to those whose work ethic, innovation, and commitment mirrored the values Kofi had instilled from the start. In every department, he implemented mentorship programs, ethical incentives, and community outreach, ensuring that the company's growth was sustainable and that the ripple effects of his efforts touched more than just the balance sheet. Outside the office, the story of Kofi Abiola's rise began to circulate widely. Newspapers picked up on the acquisition, highlighting the unlikely journey from street-level salesperson to chairman of a major financial institution. Young entrepreneurs in Machenga and surrounding regions were inspired by his story, seeing in it the proof that grit, perseverance, and ingenuity could overcome the rigid expectations of society and the derision of peers. Kofi's philosophy became a quiet legend. Success is not measured by the titles one holds, but by the impact one creates and the integrity maintained along the way. Yet Kofi never let the fame distract him. Even as he moved in spaces of influence, he continued to return to the communities that had shaped him. Checking in with small businesses, mentoring youths, and ensuring that the water filtration projects, he had begun expanded access to clean water in villages far beyond Nkalagu. The corporate world, with all its complexity, became another extension of his lifelong lesson. Opportunity favors those who act with purpose, and respect is only meaningful when it is rooted in action, not posturing. One afternoon, months after the takeover, Kofi walked into a branch office in a neighboring city where Tay had previously held meetings with other executives. Ainitse, sitting behind his polished desk, looked up, a mixture of apprehension and forced composure on his face. Kofi smiled politely but firmly, taking his seat across from him. The conversation was professional, but every word carried the subtle weight of past events. Kofi's vision for the company, his insistence on ethical management, and the unspoken acknowledgement that past misjudgments had consequences. By the end of the meeting, Tay had no choice but to acknowledge, silently and grudgingly, the acumen and leadership of the man he had once humiliated. Outside the glass walls of the office, the city hummed with life, unaware of the personal reckonings taking place within. Kofi's rise was more than personal triumph. It was a statement that diligence, honesty, and courage in the face of adversity could reshape not only a career, but the very structures of power. And though the laughter at the barbecue had once seemed like a lifetime of derision, compressed into a single afternoon, it now existed only as a distant echo, a reminder that time and effort are the truest arbiters of value, that the judgments of the uninformed hold little sway over the destiny of the determined, and that those who mock the hard-working often find themselves quietly swept aside by the unassuming force of persistence and vision. Kofi Abiola, once the boy cycling through dusty streets with a handful of filters, now commanded attention not through volume or arrogance, but through quiet authority and the unmistakable evidence of a life built from sweat, intellect, and unwavering resolve, proving beyond any doubt that true power lies not in derision or inherited prestige, but in the patient accumulation of skill, trust, and integrity. As the months progressed, Kofi Abiola's influence began to extend beyond the confines of Mockery financial holdings, reaching into communities, local governments, and social initiatives in ways that surprised even the most skeptical observers. In Nkalagu, his home village, construction of clean water systems accelerated, and young people who had once seen only limited opportunities now began to dream bigger, inspired by Kofi's journey from door-to-door salesman to corporate chairman. He personally oversaw mentorship programs, investing in local schools, and creating entrepreneurship workshops for youths who, like him, had talent but lacked direction and resources. These initiatives were not mere philanthropy. They were extensions of Kofi's belief that true leadership uplifts those around it and creates sustainable impact. Meanwhile, the dynamics at Mockery Financial Holdings continued to shift in subtle, powerful ways. Mockery, once a figure of unchallenged authority among his peers and colleagues, increasingly found himself grappling with the reality of being subordinate to the very person he had humiliated. The irony was palpable during meetings where Tay would present ideas with the polished confidence he had relied on for years, only for Kofi to respond with calm, pointed analysis, revealing gaps that no inherited prestige could disguise. Gradually, the humiliation that Tay had felt on that day at the barbecue transformed into a grudging respect, though never fully voiced because pride and ego were still tangled in his identity. Other classmates, who had laughed and whispered, now had to recalibrate their perception of Kofi Abiola. Social gatherings that once centered around mockery now saw hushed whispers of admiration and quiet envy. Those who had underestimated him realized that character and diligence mattered far more than titles, degrees, or the hollow applause of superficial success. Yet Kofi remained unaffected by these shifts in perception. He did not revel in the downfall of former mockers. His satisfaction came from seeing the broader outcomes of his labor, the expansion of the company, the tangible improvement in communities, and the loyalty of employees who thrived under his leadership. One day, during a regional strategy summit, Kofi walked into a meeting room where some of his former classmates had been called to report on their departments. Tay, seated at the table with carefully arranged papers and a forced smile, glanced at Kofi with a flicker of discomfort. The conversation began with routine updates, but it quickly became clear that Kofi's insight honed over years of building a business from scratch far surpassed the polished but untested strategies of those who had relied on inherited systems and social confidence. Each question Kofi posed revealed both the strengths and weaknesses of the organization, and he guided the discussion with a balance of firmness and encouragement, ensuring that lessons were learned without unnecessary public shaming. Yet the former class hierarchy had been fully inverted. Those who once mocked now listened, occasionally biting their lips to suppress the sting of realization. Outside the corporate walls, Kofi's story spread like wildfire. Media outlets chronicled his journey, celebrating the underdog who had turned ridicule into respect, ambition into achievement, and hardship into opportunity. Young entrepreneurs cited him as an inspiration, and local leaders sought his guidance in economic development projects. Even former classmates who had once laughed openly now approached him with caution and admiration, unsure whether to treat him as a peer a superior, or a mentor. Kofi, however, remained grounded. He continued his routine of checking in with grassroots projects, ensuring that water filtration systems reached the most remote areas, and mentoring young people who reminded him of his own early struggles. Each day, he balanced corporate responsibilities with personal investment in community well-being, proving that success was not just accumulation of wealth or power, but meaningful impact on lives. And while the echoes of that Saturday barbecue remained, they were no longer tinged with humiliation or revenge. They were a quiet reminder that resilience, vision, and unwavering integrity create results that mockery cannot diminish. Kofi Abiola had become more than a businessman. He had become a symbol of possibility, a living testament to the principle that character outweighs circumstance, perseverance outlasts derision, and respect is earned through action rather than claimed through social pretense. Omari and others who had once measured value by shallow criteria now lived daily with the awareness that true achievement requires work, risk, and humility. Kofi's leadership transformed the company culture, the communities it touched, and the mindset of everyone who crossed his path, reinforcing a timeless truth. The world does not reward arrogance, but rewards those who combine vision with action. And those who dare to belittle others may one day find themselves learning from the very people they scorned. In the twilight of one particularly long day, as Kofi watched a group of children from a nearby village drink clean water for the first time, thanks to a filtration project he had overseen, he felt a quiet satisfaction. He had not returned to Nkalagu to prove himself to anyone, but to honor the principles instilled in him by his parents and the lessons learned through years of hard work. That satisfaction, deeper than recognition, deeper than wealth or titles, was the enduring legacy of a life lived with courage, determination, and unwavering integrity. A life that turned derision into destiny and skepticism into inspiration. As Kofi Abiola's influence grew, the final pieces of his journey began to fall into place, reflecting the depth of his persistence and the foresight of his decisions. Within Omari Financial Holdings, the company culture shifted irrevocably. Employees learned to respect diligence and accountability over inherited privilege, and corporate practices were overhauled to reward creativity, integrity, and initiative rather than mere adherence to hierarchy. Even Omari, who had once led the mockery against Kofi, now found himself navigating a world in which he had no automatic advantage. The transformation was subtle at first. Kofi's strategic guidance exposed flaws in long-standing assumptions, prompting the company to adopt innovative solutions that increased efficiency and expanded market reach. Departments that had relied on outdated procedures were modernized, training programs instituted, and community outreach expanded, reflecting Kofi's understanding that true corporate growth required both profit and social impact. Tay, who had prided himself on office influence and social connections, struggled privately with the inversion of roles, experiencing a mixture of envy, humility, and begrudging admiration. In some moments, he approached Kofi for guidance, only to realize that he had underestimated the man he once ridiculed. Beyond corporate success, Kofi's personal life blossomed in ways that mirrored his professional achievements. He reconnected with family and old friends, sharing both material success and the deeper lessons of perseverance, integrity, and vision. He became a mentor not only to employees and young entrepreneurs, but also to peers who had once doubted him, offering guidance without malice, proving that true leadership empowers rather than humiliates. Socially, the story of Kofi Abiola became emblematic of the underdog's triumph. Villages across the region celebrated the expansion of clean water systems, schools flourished with mentorship programs, and small businesses found guidance and support, creating a ripple effect that extended far beyond the reach of the original company. Kofi's message, that character, work ethic, and resilience matter more than titles, degrees, or inherited wealth, resonated widely, inspiring those who had felt marginalized or underestimated to pursue their ambitions with courage. The final encounter that symbolized the culmination of Kofi's journey occurred at a high-profile industry gala. Omari, along with several other former classmates, attended with the usual air of superficial confidence. As the event unfolded, Kofi navigated conversations with poise, offering insights, building partnerships, and subtly demonstrating the contrast between earned respect and assumed entitlement. Tae watched quietly, recognizing the full arc of his former arrogance and the consequences of underestimating dedication, humility, and intelligence. By the evening's end, it was unmistakable that Kofi had become a figure of influence, admiration, and authority, a living embodiment of the principle that mockery cannot diminish true achievement. Reflecting on his journey, Kofi thought back to the hot Saturday afternoon in Machenga when laughter had crashed around him like waves, when he had been dismissed, ridiculed, and underestimated. That memory, instead of fueling bitterness, reinforced his belief that patience, effort, and integrity always outlast fleeting judgments, and that destiny favors those who persist quietly but relentlessly. He considered the lessons he had imparted, both to himself and to others. That leadership is earned through action, that respect is given to character and results, and that those who seek to demean others often find themselves eclipsed by the quiet determination of those they belittle. In the years that followed, Kofi Abiola's story became part of local law, a source of inspiration for aspiring entrepreneurs, students, and communities striving for better futures. His company continued to grow, not merely in financial terms, but in societal impact, exemplifying a vision of success rooted in purpose, service, and resilience. Kofi never sought to flaunt his achievements. Instead, he carried them with a quiet dignity, always remembering the early days of cycling from door to door, demonstrating water filters and enduring skepticism from those who could not yet see the promise in his ambition. The lessons of those days, perseverance, humility, and the courage to believe in oneself, remained at the heart of every decision, every expansion, and every act of leadership. And so the story of Kofi Abiola reached its natural conclusion. A boy from Nkalagu who transformed mockery into motivation, adversity into opportunity, and persistence into legacy. The barbecue that had once symbolized ridicule became a distant echo, a reminder that life's true measure is not in laughter directed at others, but in the tangible impact of one's actions. Kofi walked through the corridors of his company, through villages that had been transformed by his vision, and through communities uplifted by his integrity, knowing that respect, success, and fulfillment are earned, not inherited, not assumed, and certainly not taken lightly. And in that knowledge lay the quiet triumph of a life lived fully, with purpose, courage, and unwavering character. The world had laughed at him once, but it was Kofi Abiola who now defined the terms of success, who shaped the paths of others, and who proved beyond doubt that those who dare to rise with integrity and determination will never be forgotten, their legacy echoing far beyond the shallow judgments of those who once looked down on them. Kofi's story shows that success isn't about titles or where you begin, it's about resilience, hard work, and staying true to your values. If this story inspired you, drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more stories that remind you to keep believing in yourself. If you like this story, make sure you subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share with your friends and family so you don't miss the next powerful story coming your way. Drop a heart in comment, like and subscribe my channel, and visit my channel for more interesting story videos.